Today, public health remains our top priority. But thanks to Marion County residents, all of you, you've done your part. And I cannot thank you enough. Wearing face coverings, keeping travel to a minimum, and staying inside, even when it was difficult. So we have now begun the process of reopening our economy. Our city's restaurants have always been at the center of what makes Indianapolis such a wonderful place to live. For the last decade, our food scene in Indianapolis has also fueled the tourism and hospitality industry in Marion County, drawing national attention and illuminating important social and cultural spaces throughout our city. Put simply, our restaurants have always been there for us. They've helped us mark birthdays, last days, and bad days. And they've never balked when it was just a regular day. And you really needed that burger. They've been there for us, so now it's time for us to be there for them. And that is why this administration, working with partners across our city, have been working to provide our restaurants with the tools they need to enjoy a safe reopening. That process will begin this Friday, when restaurants in Marion County will have the option to provide outdoor seating for dine-in patrons. This will allow restaurants to return to dining services beyond carryout, while continuing to adhere to social distancing requirements. We understand that those requirements aren't always easy to meet, either fiscally or logistically. Today, we are providing resources that I believe will help in both of those areas. First, as we announced last week, the City of Indianapolis and the Indy Chamber have formed the Restart Grant Program, a $5 million resource for small businesses to purchase PPE for staff. Businesses with fewer than 150 employees can receive up to $5,000 for reimbursements for things like masks, gloves, and protective barriers that may need to be installed in the restaurants. So to learn more, I would encourage you to head to response.indychamber.com/restart. That's response.indychamber.com/restart. However, access to PPE will not be the only issue that our restaurants will be facing. Some lack outdoor seating. Others who do have outdoor sections may still not have the adequate space to keep patrons and pedestrians separate, especially in high-traffic cultural districts throughout Indianapolis. For this reason, the city has brought together resources from across departments. We've convened conversations with a broad coalition of stakeholders to launch Dine Out Indy, an initiative aimed at making it safer and easier for restaurants to open. First, we'll be temporarily closing 5 sections of roadway, allowing restaurants to extend outdoor dining areas while still preserving pedestrian walkways. The roads affected will be portions of Massachusetts Avenue, Georgia Street, South Monument Circle, Illinois Street, and Broad Ripple Avenue. It's important to note that these roadways were chosen not just for the density of restaurant offerings and pedestrian traffic, but they also avoid blocking major transit lanes. Importantly, we also recognize that many non-restaurants are located along these corridors. Now, while we are confident there will be ample street parking for those who choose to visit all retail and food establishments, we also have dedicated city staff to working. We've dedicated city staff to work alongside the individual businesses to ensure that they can continue to operate effectively, whether that be in allowing for vendor deliveries or for finding places for customer pickups. Obviously, there are many, many more restaurants in Marion County than the ones along these 5 streets. The good news is that most restaurants have parking lots or adjoining properties that could serve as outdoor dining space. Now, under normal circumstances, the process to obtain approval for temporary outdoor seating is complicated, and it stretches across multiple layers of state and local government. Anyone who's undergone this permitting knows that this doesn't happen overnight, but we recognize that these are not normal circumstances. And for businesses that have waited months to open up, we don't think they should have to wait any longer than absolutely necessary. And that is why the city and its partner agencies have created the indy.gov/dineout website. That's indy.gov/dineout. It is here where restaurants can apply for fast-track permitting through a dedicated staff and a streamlined process. We are also working with the state to ensure that this effort is coordinated to the fullest extent possible. Indianapolis will stand by our businesses every step of the way through this difficult reopening process. We recognize how critical you are to the livelihood of our residents, how critical you are to the livelihood of our economy, and to the livelihood of our character. We will clear as many obstacles as we can to make sure you are here when Indianapolis resumes our status as one of America's great host cities. So as a final matter, I want to say that as we begin reopening our city, our ongoing commitment to the overall public health of the residents and the citizens of Indianapolis will require that we continue to think creatively about how to help our small business community. And this is just one important example of doing exactly that. And importantly, I want to note that this is new for all of us here in the administration as well. We may not get everything correct right off the bat. And for each business, we may have to work together to find unique solutions for problems that may arise. But these restaurants and other affected small businesses have my commitment that we will work together to tackle these issues. I am confident that in the end, we will find ourselves better positioned to weather these remaining storms on our path toward this new normal. As always, I want to thank all of you for your patience, your cooperation, and your suggestions. Now, with some more detail, I'd like to introduce Dan Parker, the Director of the Department of Public Works, to provide a little bit more insight as to the road closures. Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your leadership through this difficult period. DPW received many calls during our stay-at-home order that the mayor and the health department issued to close streets. We did not do that during that time period. We wanted to encourage folks to stay at home, not to venture out. As we approached the mayor's order to start reopening the economy of Indianapolis, DPW staff studied many commercial areas across our city. We looked at 5 criteria as the mayor laid out: the density of those commercial areas, the pedestrian traffic and existing pedestrian facilities. We looked at ADA compliance. We looked at our transit lines, and we looked at the ability for DPW to manage traffic. The road closures that the mayor has mentioned represent the ability to create safe pedestrian corridors in our main dense commercial areas. Therefore, under the emergency powers granted to DPW, we will start directing the closure of the streets the mayor mentioned. They will be fully operational Friday, May 22nd. Residents will start seeing DPW staff deploy the assets necessary starting on Wednesday, tomorrow, May 20th. The roads, as the mayor mentioned, are Massachusetts Avenue from the intersection of College Avenue to the intersection of New York and Delaware Streets. The cross traffic will be maintained on Alabama, New Jersey, and East Streets running north-south, and on Vermont, Michigan, and North Streets running east and west. On Georgia Street, we will close from Pennsylvania Street to Illinois Street. Cross traffic will be maintained on Meridian Street. Illinois Street will close from Georgia Street to Market Street. Cross traffic will be maintained on Washington and Maryland Streets. And Broad Ripple Avenue will close from College Avenue to the Monon Trail, and cross traffic will be maintained on Guilford and Winthrop Avenues. The 2 southern quadrants of Monument Circle will close. The southern spoke of Meridian Street will remain open for the Indiana State Department of Health. I'd like to thank the staff of DPW and engineering, street operations, traffic operations, solid waste, and planning. We have worked with our partners at Park Indy. This will require the closure of 384 spots on Massachusetts Avenue, 55 parking spaces on Illinois Street, and 60 spots on Broad Ripple Avenue. I'd like to point out that parking in the Mass Ave area, although impacted the greatest, there will be over 370 spots within a 2-minute walk of the road closures. That is 500 feet. There will be 370 spots available on the street. I'd also like to thank our partners at Indigo and our partners in our utilities for working with us in this time period. And like I said, the work on this will begin on Wednesday, and we look forward to working with individual businesses to work out issues that arise with these road closures. And with that, I'd like to pass this over to Jeff Bennett, Deputy Mayor of Community Development, to talk specifically about the availability for restaurants.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks, Mayor. Just to reiterate a little bit what Dan said, this began out of a conversation related to public health. We know that space matters, that airflow matters. We know from Dr. Kane's guidance that we should avoid crowded spots, and that we should even limit our time spent outdoors in spaces where social distancing can't be maintained for lengthy periods of time. So from that discussion about public health, evolved a discussion around, well, how do we accommodate businesses that seek to reopen on the schedule that the mayor and Dr. Kane began to lay out last week? We know from other cities what happens when there may not be a plan for reopening. Crowds gather and social distancing isn't observed. We've seen pictures of what other cities have done. We've also seen what other cities have done to enable social distancing and safe gathering. We saw in our own city pictures posted on social media of Broad Ripple Avenue on Cinco de Mayo, and our other cultural districts on any given nice weather weekend where there are no cars to speak of parked in those corridors, but there are people gathered on sidewalks that are too small to accommodate social distancing as the health department has recommended. So we began to set out a plan to accommodate businesses and restaurants. So beginning, as the mayor mentioned, on May 22nd, restaurants that have outdoor seating already available can reopen using that outdoor seating, provided that the seating that the tables are situated 6 feet apart at least, and that dining parties are limited to 6 or less people. That's a pretty easy box to check. However, we also have businesses that may want to use outdoor space for shoppers. We have restaurants that may want to expand that available outdoor dining. And we have restaurants across the city that may like to offer outdoor dining that don't currently have it. And that, for those 3 instances, as the mayor mentioned, we've introduced a streamlined permitting approval process with the Department of Business and Neighborhood Services. So effective right about now, indy.gov/dineout, which was an information gathering portal for the last week, will transition to become the permit application intake site. So businesses and restaurants that would like to avail themselves of approval to expand outdoors or to offer services outdoors can go to that site and apply. The permits that are required, or the licenses that are required, will be approved just as fast as the Department of Business and Services staff can write those permits. And there's no cost for those permits. We'll be sharing a little bit later this morning, if not right now, some frequently asked questions in a consolidated document format that we can also share with businesses that are interested, that will help give some guidelines on what's approvable quickly, what requires a little bit more discussion, how to stay in compliance with state agencies like the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission with outdoor seating, and what it takes and for how long a business can operate under these relaxed requirements. We'll also be publicizing available parking. So Dan mentioned that we are sensitive to the finite number of parking spaces that are available around downtown and in our cultural districts. So we'll be working with Downtown Indy to publicize what spots remain available. We think that most of our visitors, as we've seen on recent weekends, will walk and will bike in these areas to the businesses that are now reopened. But we also want people to come downtown if they haven't been in a while, and we want to make sure they know where they can park and where they can get to businesses easily. We'll be monitoring the results of this work in real time on a daily basis. Also, as the mayor said, we know that this isn't going to be perfect out of the gate. And knowing in real time what's working and what's not will allow us to course correct if necessary in days rather than in weeks, so that we help the most businesses with the most flexibility for the most time possible. So Mayor, thank you for letting me say a few words. I want to introduce Brian Madison from the Department of Business and Neighborhood Services, who's on here as we get to the Q&A portion. If we get into the nitty gritty of permitting, Brian can help us with those quick answers.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bennett, and thank you, Mayor Hogsett, and all the other city leaders that have worked together to stand this initiative up in such a short period of time. I want to highlight also, we are working very closely with the State Alcohol Tobacco Commission and the Marion County Public Health Department to make sure that anybody participating in this program is working very closely with those entities so that they don't run afoul of their rules as well. So we've created a streamlined process. You've heard mentioned today the website, which I will repeat, is indy.gov/dineout, and it is officially live as a means of applying for permission to have outdoor seating. So as of today, you will be able to submit an application. We have had a number of people submit inquiries already. We anticipate there will be pretty high demand for permission to operate in the public right-of-way. So it is an all hands on deck situation for us at the Department of Business and Neighborhood Services. We anticipate a very streamlined process. We will be able to get back to you within 24 hours. I think probably the most important thing is to simply follow the steps on the form, and most importantly, submit a site plan. We want to make sure, of course, that what you're proposing meets with the social distancing guidelines and ADA compliance as well. We do want to make sure that we keep those things in mind with any of the proposed outdoor seating. So if this is something that I think we've created in a way that takes what we've done well here in Indianapolis, and that's host large events and conventions, and utilizes a very similar process where we can issue these very quickly. And so we certainly look forward to doing our part to support restaurants reopening. And as such, we are waiving the fees that would typically be associated with these types of applications. So we are hoping to support local businesses and have them get started as quickly as possible. And we'll make sure that the permit process doesn't stand in the way of that. So with that, I just want to thank all leaders, but also the BNS staff, which has been hard at work at this program and standing it up during these unprecedented times. And we will be processing these applications remotely and hoping to get out and visit these restaurants just as much as everyone else. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
As a reminder, if you have a question, you can enter your name and outlet into the Q&A box, and you will be called upon and unmuted to be able to ask your question of the group. Our first question comes from Russ McQuaid at Fox 59.
All right, are we here?
Hey, Rob.
Yes, we are. And good morning to everybody. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Well, what are we going to do at 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon when everybody's standing shoulder to shoulder waiting to just walk down Broad Ripple or Mass Avenue? And we can assume the merchants and the restaurants are going to do the best they can to follow these guidelines. But if everybody is shoulder to shoulder walking down there together, what are we going to do to convince people to use their better judgment to not enter a crowded area or to stay 6 feet away from each other?
Dan, you want to handle that?
Russ, DPW is obviously coordinating with IMPD and our other public safety agencies related to some of the questions you mentioned. But the key is the development of the pedestrian corridor, and that is why Massachusetts Avenue is closing first. There will be a 24-foot segment of the road that will be utilized by pedestrians. We want to encourage pedestrians to leave the sidewalks and move to the middle of the road to utilize so they can socially distance. If you look at the double yellow line that's at Mass Ave, there's 12 feet on either side of it, and that is going to be the pedestrian corridor that we want people to use. We do not want folks using the sidewalks, which are not really built for being 6 foot apart. But if you move to the middle of the road, there could be 4 people across that walk and be 6 foot apart. So it's encouraging folks, and IMPD has stated that they would be out educating, making sure that people do socially distance and wear appropriate facial coverings.
Yeah, Russ, I'd simply add to that. We will approach these issues as they occur, but I want to encourage everyone to remain safe and use common sense, as well as if you have available masks to wear them, whether you're serving or whether you're simply enjoying the dining experience, at least until you get food and drink. So I'm confident that the people of Indianapolis understand the enormous importance of maintaining the public health. But we're now at a point where we feel confident that we can reopen our small businesses in responsible and safe ways. And if people are not practicing appropriate social distancing, I think they will be gently reminded to do so.
Abdul Hakim Shabazz, Indy Politics.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Hey, Abdul.
A couple of things. With our recent crime issues, are you worried, concerned that people will actually come out with all the work that your staff is doing to make sure, once again, that Hoosiers can kind of get out? And number two, where are we with barbershops and salons and tattoos and massage places? Obviously, I think somebody has like a 2,000 person thing on change.org calling for barbershops open. Where are we with those?
Well, IMPD and all of our public safety agencies are working diligently across the community to ensure safety. We have had a couple of instances of homicides over the last couple of days that are of concern to me. And obviously, I think that for the most part, it's fair to say, Abdul, that the restaurant areas remain among some of the safest areas in our city. Downtown, for example, is among the most safe neighborhood in all of Indianapolis. So I'm not really worried that the people of Indianapolis will stay home simply because they have heard news reports of some random incidents of gun violence. But we'll be vigilant and we'll be available to take care of situations if situations arise. Secondly, we haven't made any decisions yet regarding barbershops and hair salons. I know that there is a lot of interest in their reopening, and we are in the process of developing the same type of stand-up for all businesses, not just tattoo parlors and hair salons and barbershops. But those announcements will be forthcoming perhaps as early as sometime next week.
Eric Berman, WIBC.
Hello, Mr. Mayor. Good morning.
Hey, Eric.
A couple of questions. One, I guess, is more of a clarification. Where do the restaurants actually put outdoor seating? If I'm following this correctly, they can expand onto the sidewalk if they're not already there, but they're not expanding into the street itself. That becomes the pedestrian walkway. Can people expand into the street? Can people expand into parking lots or parking spaces? And that takes me to my second question, which is, if I did the math right as Dan was reeling it off, we're eliminating 500 parking spaces. It still leaves 400, but that's 2/3 going away on something that's challenging even in good times. How are people going to find a place to park?
Dan?
I'll take that one. Eric, to answer your second question first, the numbers I mentioned were 400, almost 400 spots that were within 2-minute walk of the closures. There are a lot more spaces downtown than those close to 400 spots. Obviously, there's several parking garages as well. The ones I was mentioning were just on-street parking. So there is plenty of parking downtown. We're going to be working with Downtown Indy to publicize the areas that folks can park downtown and how easy it is to do it. Some of these corridors do not have much traffic volume. Traffic backups are primarily created by people who are just waiting to get that one spot that opens up near the place that they're traveling to. If you go 1 block away from wherever you're trying to go to, there will be plenty of parking spaces available for you to park. And then the second question, your first question, I'm going to let Jeff answer some of it, but we are reserving a 24-foot pedestrian corridor on each of these areas. There will be space for places to move into the right-of-way beyond that. And I'll let Jeff take it. So in some places, it's going to be the parking lane. In some, it's the traffic. In some traffic lanes, some of the existing sidewalk. On a case-by-case basis, folks will work with BNS to work through that. But DPW will take a look at each of the layouts that each restaurant submits in terms of what they would like to do. But if you think of each street, there's going to be a 24-foot pedestrian corridor down the middle to allow for pedestrians to socially distance. From there, some of these right-of-ways are extremely large, and there'll be plenty of space. Jeff?
I like when Dan said he would kick it over to me to answer the question, and then he answered the question. So, Eric, it really is a case-by-case basis, and that's why we want businesses to reach out to BNS through the indy.gov/dineout web link, because they can put in to their what they're sort of thinking about, what their request might be. Then BNS can review it in coordination with DPW to figure out where it makes the most sense to put that additional seating, or where it makes the most sense for a business that wants to open up, and sort of outdoor area for sale of retail merchandise. Where does that make sense? Does it make sense to be on the former sidewalk? Does it make sense to be in the temporarily closed parking spaces? Or is there another approach? And then we also think about the fact that we have restaurants all over the city that aren't in these 5 cultural districts or 5 areas where we're closing streets in more densely populated commercial areas. We want to make it as easy as possible for them to seat people outside too. And they can propose via the site plan that Brian already mentioned, where they would like to put up an open air canopy and tables and chairs in an area that's contiguous to their current restaurant, and we can get those turned around pretty quickly.
Richard Essex, Wish TV.
Mayor, and thanks for taking my question this morning. There's a couple of questions. How long do you think this is going to go on? How many weeks, days, or months do you foresee us having people dining on the sidewalks? And are you going to allow them to put up structures? And what about tables and chairs at nights? How is this good? What about sanitation of these areas?
Well, Richard, thanks for the question. Let me answer that. At the very latest, it would probably be July 4 weekend from essentially the 22nd of May. We would envision at the very latest July 4 weekend. But we'll continue to monitor the program. We'll continue to communicate with businesses to see what's working and what adjustments need to be made. As it relates to the sanitation issues and the like that you raised in your question, I'll throw that to Dan and or Jeff.
Richard, on the sanitation issue, obviously DPW solid waste is going to need access to each of these areas. What we're going to work with businesses on is at the time, solid waste will pick up trash in these corridors in each morning. All of these areas will still be accessible for emergency vehicles as well. But we will work with businesses to have deliveries done at that time period as well. So the morning is when we're going to be asking businesses to get their deliveries set up. And at that same time is when we will also bring in our street sweeping equipment to these areas to make sure that the streets, the pedestrian corridors are clean. And then I'll kick it over to either Jeff or Brian to go over what would be the requirements of restaurants that do move out into the right-of-way. But any restaurant that participates in this program will have sort of a designated area that DPW will put out some of our bike rack to cordon off that area so that folks know that that's being utilized by a restaurant. So Jeff or Brian?
Yeah, one thing that I would simply add is with respect to the time element, these are limited duration licenses that are being issued to each of the restaurants. So pursuant to the website, the form is a form that was developed in cooperation with our department to provide us with answers to the questions that we need. And it's been said, but I'll reemphasize the site plan itself. Nobody knows these restaurants better than the owners, the managers of these restaurants, and they're the folks that are going to tell us where they think they can have this outdoor activity, whether it's an adjacent lot, as in side yard or parking lot, or is it a parking space? Is it somewhere in the right of way? But we will work with them. They will answer the questions that are on the form, and we will respond to them with any questions or clarifications that's needed. We anticipate with that site plan being able to see very clearly what areas they want to put seating and be able to prove based on that. So.
And then as it relates to sanitation, there is guidance available from the CDC and from the Marion County Public Health Department related to sanitation of tables and chairs and frequently contacted surfaces. In a conversation yesterday about the use of restrooms. So restrooms that are inside restaurants will be available for customers to use, even though seating is limited to outdoors, on the condition that it's one person at a time in the restroom, regardless of how many fixtures might be present in the restroom, and that handles and faucets and knobs and doors are cleaned frequently between uses. So there is a new normal as it relates to public health and the safety of the public when gathering in places. And I'm sure that guidance will evolve over time, but this is how we plan to start.
All right, you've been listening to Mayor Hogsett and his staff discuss Phase 2 of Marion County's reopening plan. Indianapolis Mayor Joe Hogsett announced starting this Friday, restaurants can provide outdoor seating for customers. Indoor dining will still remain closed.
Access to PPE will not be the only issue that our restaurants will be facing. Some lack outdoor seating. Others who do have outdoor sections may still not have the adequate space to keep patrons and pedestrians separate, especially in high-traffic cultural districts throughout Indianapolis.
Indianapolis launching Dine Out Indy, an effort aimed at making it safer and easier for restaurants to reopen. 5 sections of roadways will also be temporarily closed in the city, allowing restaurants to extend outdoor dining areas. We're talking about portions of Mass Ave, Georgia Street, South Monument Circle, Illinois Street, and Broad Ripple. The mayor also announced $5 million in grant money for small businesses to buy and install personal protective equipment. For a look at what roads will be affected by the temporary closures, you can visit our website right now at wishtv.com.
And Mike, weather-wise here, if you're heading out this afternoon, I would grab the rain gear. We have a little bit of light rain going on across parts of eastern Indiana, down or south, also up to our north. The rain moving from Ohio back in here across parts of Indiana. Eventually, the rain will get out of here. We may see some sunshine later on. We'll time all this out in my 8-day forecast.
You're watching Wish TV, Indiana's only statewide TV news network.